Welcome to the latest edition of Dynamic Political Centrism, hosted by Alan Steinberg, produced by Dr. Yonaton and Yoni Yares. This week, closing out 2024 with Alan and Yoni, a special edition.
Good evening and welcome, listeners of this podcast. I am Alan Steinberg. I am the host of this podcast, the voice of dynamic political centrism. And tonight we are doing a special show, and a full participant in this show is our producer, Dr. Yonaton Yares, the most outstanding producer of political documentaries and political programs I've worked with. And tonight, Yoni and I are talking about a retrospective on the year 2024. And in effect, this show is going to be termed as Closing Out the Year with Alan and Yoni. So we're delighted to have you join with us. And Dr. Yares, we've had quite a year, and we've had a lot of interesting guests, and it's been a delight to work with you. And going forward in 2025, election year for governor of New Jersey, that is actually my favorite election year, because in New Jersey, if you just show up, you get to know everybody. And so you and I will be dealing with a lot of critical people that we know personally. That's different from a presidential election, where we may know some of the actors, but not all of them. So delighted to have you here, and Chag Sameach for tomorrow night. Yeah. Happy Hanukkah, and may you and your family have a marvelous year, and we have some fun ahead.
Yes, no, looking forward to it. It's been a really enjoyable experience. Impressive. I think this is now our 9th episode we've done together, if I can count properly.
Well, there's never been a problem with your counting.
My math teachers might argue that point from high school.
Well, what do they know? They haven't seen you in a number of years.
That's true.
Okay, we'll get started. Yeah. And we'll start with the leading national event, of course, of 2024, which was the surprising election of Donald Trump, formerly the 45th president of the United States. He has now been elected as the 47th president of the United States. The first president to be elected to a term of office after an intermediate term since Grover Cleveland. So that in itself is of historic significance.
And we acknowledge all trivia games that have now been outdated due to this election. We apologize profusely.
Oh, that's true. That's true. All the ones that said that Grover Cleveland was the only one, well, those are all out of date. And that's what happens in politics. Yes. You know, events happen and trends happen, and things reverse themselves. But this election was very critical, not just because of the tense state of the world, but it also represented a full takeover of the Republican Party of our national government. Yes. The Republican Party now has control of the presidency. It now has control of the Supreme Court, and it now has control of both houses of Congress. So Donald Trump really has a lot of discretion. I will say this. The key as to whether democracy survives, given Trump's views, which I term as outright fascist, the key will be whether our norms survive and the guardrails survive. And that will be more up to midstream Republicans than anything else, in my view. Your thoughts?
I think so. I also think the fact that the House majority is the narrowest in history, they have to vote count and whip votes, and the speaker role is so tenuous that, I mean, people are already talking about replacing Mike Johnson after what took place with the continuing resolution for the budget. So that the House has always been a mess to be able to control when it's been this narrow of majority. I think the Republicans are now giving more and more credit to what Nancy Pelosi managed to do when she was speaker, that she kept the party in line and in lockstep. And the Republicans don't seem to have that level of leadership. They're so overzealous. They're extreme all over the place. There isn't that same unified voice. Whereas on the Democratic side, Hakeem Jeffries has them speaking with one voice. They can disagree, but when it comes to the floor, they are unified.
I agree with you 100%. And the key will be whether Republicans, in a very short order, practically before the inauguration, which takes place on the 20th, whether they can get their act together in that short amount of time. January 20th is not long for this world. And I would be very surprised if, number one, if Mike Johnson holds on to the speakership. And number two, I like to make predictions, but I will not even guess at who the new speaker would be. I got a kick out of something. I actually knew about this ahead of time. Of all the talk of Elon Musk becoming the speaker, that actually would be legal.
Yes, it is. Very few people know that you do not have to be an elected member of the House to be Speaker.
I remember a few years ago there was talk of bringing Newt Gingrich back as speaker because he was a very effective speaker. And I just wonder, I'm not going to predict this, but I just wonder if there's a deadlock for speaker, given the fact that he does have a good relationship with President-elect Trump, whether some thought may be given to bringing him back as speaker. I'm not going to predict it, but it wouldn't surprise me.
No, it could be interesting. My question is over and under 17 ballots this time around.
I think that you're talking very adeptly in football terms, and we may be stuck with a game that goes into sudden death. There's going to be a lot of tension coming up.
Will punches be
I,
thrown again?
well, that's true too. Okay. I will say this. I have been talking for throughout this term, throughout the Biden term, ever since January 6th of 2021, right before Biden took the oath of office. I've been talking incessantly about the threat to democracy posed by Donald Trump. I have more hope given the events of this week, not because of anything Trump did, but because of the resistance that something like 38 House members gave Trump, refusing to go along what he wanted in terms of extending the debt ceiling now and also standing pat
Actually,
on
effectively
discussing it.
eliminating the debt ceiling,
What's
which is
that?
effectively wanting to eliminate the debt ceiling is what he wanted, which is insane. Thinking of where the Republican Party has gone from fiscal conservatism to eliminating the debt ceiling.
Well, I agree that in effect that's what they would be doing, but I really can't predict what's going to come out of that. That's why Trump wanted the Democrats basically to take care of the hard work on this case,
Yep.
doing what had to be done with the debt ceiling, and uh, they basically said, "Hey, you're the president now. It's all up to you."
Yep.
So I think that that was a sign that not only the Democrats have unity, but also there are Republicans. I hope that will put America first before
In
private parochial political
in the
concerns.
positive sense of America first, not the Trump sense of America first.
Oh yeah, I heartily agree with that too. It's interesting because when I was at Northwestern as an undergraduate, I studied the America First movement. Among the members were both Gerald Ford and John F. Kennedy at one time. That was when America was at the height of its isolationism. And now it seems that, and we'll talk about this when we get to foreign policy, it seems that isolationism has come back. But Donald Trump, you and I have discussed this, is very much going to be a transactional president.
Yes.
He will do what is to his advantage. Let me put this in context because it's significant in other ways. I have often talked about fascism as being a twofold doctrine. The one doctrine is that of a governing methodology, and the governing methodology is one of authoritarian leadership. But there is another side to fascism that is equally as important, and that is the art of gaining control. And that is where fascism really comes into play. In the case of Donald Trump, that is especially pertinent and relevant because he's not so concerned about imposing any policy agenda. He wants to gain full power as president for one overriding reason. He is a grifter. He loves the grift opportunities that the presidency affords him and the possibility of earning money in ways that the founding fathers never would have approved. And that's why he wants to use fascist techniques to gain power and to keep power. And the question is how much cooperation he will have on this regard from the Republicans in the House of Representatives.
And I don't think it's going to be as much as he thinks there will be. Um, I think it was very revealing that the Matt Gaetz report came out from this Congress when originally they weren't going to do it. That's very telling. because that was disturbing about all nth degree on that one.
Yes, it was.
But they did it, and that was a bipartisan effort. It had to be a majority vote, which meant that there had to be people going for it, and truly disturbing. But I think that brings us to talking about the Democrats at this point. I think we've
Well,
come.
I think if you look going forward, there are a number of very, very difficult appointments that Trump has made.
Yes,
You have to consider, first of all, the appointment of Kash Patel, who, as I have written in the past week, is an outright fascist, and his appointment would be the ultimate serious threat to democracy. You have the appointment of Pete Hesketh as defense secretary. I have never heard a man promise that he would no longer be an alcoholic if he got a job. I mean,
yeah,
that absolutely, it would be amusing if it wasn't such a difficult prospect to ponder. And
and
go ahead.
offensive to those who are in recovery.
Absolutely. And then you have the appointment of Robert F. Kennedy Jr. His own family has expressed misgivings of that because if he is appointed, our healthcare system and the credibility of various agencies under the Department of Health and Human Services, agencies such as the Center for Disease Control, all these agencies will fall in disrepute, and it will be a scary prospect for America. So you can't at this point really apply a label to RFK Jr. It depends on what is said at the hearings, what commitments he gives, and where we go from here.
No, 100%. I think also the hearings are going to be very interesting because the Senate's not going to go into recess, and I don't think the Senate is going to put up with Trump trying to force it into recess.
I don't think so either. I think this week they showed that they can have a spine when the need calls upon it. But then again, it's a twofold process. It's a twofold issue. Number one is the issue of guardrails, and number two is that of norms, whether the constitutional norms, which everybody has adhered to for almost 250 years, whether that's going to hold up. But let's start with the Democrat prospects at the end of the year, the way
Sure.
they are today with a week to go in the year 2024. Uh, First of all, a retrospect on Kamala Harris. I thought she was a good candidate. I don't know what she could have done to guarantee a victory, but I think she communicated well. I think that she was well positioned. She was to the right of the progressives, but to the left of centrist Republicans. I think she gave a good account of herself. And whether she continues to hold up as a prospective nominee, we'll just have to wait and see.
I think the only thing she could have done differently is had her team been able to come out with a response to some of the ads that Trump hit her very hard and figure out how to connect more on the kitchen table issues. I think her not distancing herself more from Biden hurt the interview she did on CBS, I think it was, where she said she wouldn't do anything different, did not make her seem like an independent person. And she meant very well, but I think she gave a lot of fodder to the Trump team to create very easy ads. And when people are angry about financials and they hear, oh, I wouldn't change anything, it's not going to make them excited to vote for someone.
I concur exactly. I think that she didn't have to trash Biden, but she had to indicate some methodology, some policy that would be different, and some policy that originated with her. Would that have made the difference? I'm not sure, but do think that she communicated well, and her performance in the debate was outstanding. That was
I
a debate that she clearly won, and she indicated in that debate that she is a good prospect for the future.
agree. I think she did a better. I'm going to make a controversial thing. I think she was a stronger candidate than Secretary Clinton. For me,
I agree.
I think she presented much better in terms of being her own person, and not being tied to the legacies, and the dynasties. I think she showed a really good story. And I think she's been very smart in the aftermath. I'll be curious to see what she chooses. I've heard rumors of her potentially being a candidate for governor in California, which I think if she does that, she couldn't be a candidate for president because you'll be governor for a year and you just don't do that.
Well, I'll tell you the issues involved if she runs for the governorship. That means that definitely Gavin Newsom will be running for president.
Yeah.
I do not think that Gavin Newsom would win the nomination,
Not at
but
all.
he will make a decision based upon what he thinks his prospects are. If he decides to run, I think that the powers that be in California will try to maneuver Kamala Harris into running for governor, because that would take away a potential difficult opponent for Gavin Newsom. And at the same time, it would shore her up for the future. She could make a future run for the White House
I
after
also,
having been governor of California.
but I also feel at this point we need to get away from the coastal elites as our Democratic candidates. We've got to look over flyover state. I think the flyover states or deep South. I'm tired of New England, Mid Atlantic uh, monopoly over the Democratic candidates. It needs to end, and California is basically the East Coast of the West Coast of the East Coast. People can't connect to that.
Well, I agree, but I will say this. The problem right now is something like 43 of the states, no, maybe even more, maybe 41, are clearly connected with either Republican red or Democrat blue. That's
Correct.
not going to change. Our presidential elections are going to continue to be very close affairs where red states will tend to go for Republican governorships and U.S. senators and members of the House, and blue states will go for the Democrats who are running for president, running for U.S. Senate and the House of Representatives. So I think that it's going to be difficult to disentangle from those states from whatever their political leanings are. But nevertheless, I think for the future's sake, if nothing else, the efforts have to be made to elect some minority party members to high offices in these states.
100%. I think we need to stop giving up on them. We need to run strong. I think this midterm election in 2026 is going to be fascinating. Um, in terms of any of the open seats, who retires, who doesn't. I think we're going to see the retirement very soon of Mitch McConnell. I think Nancy Pelosi's got one last term in her. So I think we're going to see a lot of turnover on the national stage of the people who have been the chief enemy person, for lack of a better word, from each of the parties.
Well, I share your opinion calculus that you just gave. I think that, first of all, a final word from me in terms of Kamala Harris. Will she be running again? I don't know. I think that by the time this campaign was over, she looked seriously wounded in terms of the personal impact the pressures of the campaign
100%.
had on her. I don't know if she's going to want to run again, but if she does, she will have a large sector of the women's community out there backing her up. So I would not count her out either for a run, or if she runs, a possibility of her becoming the front runner.
100%. I think she's very smart and very calculated. She'll take the time it needed. Also, she values mental health, and I think she will set the example of giving herself some time to recover, and then she will make an announcement that will, I think, undoubtedly shock us all because we may have not considered her options.
I think you're right, and she does have time to consider these options. In the meantime, let's talk about some of the other Democratic possibilities for
Sure.
the presidency for the campaign of 2028. The list really starts with a number of top tier. Among these top tier, first of all, is Andy Beshear, the governor of Kentucky. The reason I think that he will have appeal, he's been an effective governor, but more than that, he is what I would call a middle American. He's not, and this is unfortunate that that should be a consideration, but it will be because the Democrats will feel that they have to appeal to more than just minority groups, more than just people of color, the ethnic groups affiliated with them. The Jewish community is looked upon by many people outside the big Jewish states, wrongly so, as being somewhat of an international influence. So the Democrats may decide that basically the heck with all that, and therefore they want to nominate a middle American. And I think in this regard, Andy Beshear would head the list.
Yeah, so speaking of another person who represents Middle America, I think Secretary Pete Buttigieg comes to mind. I think he had the best wins in the party in terms of being able to go out and sell the Biden message. He approaches the LGBTQ issue incredibly well as being a member there, but also being able to speak of it in a very forthright manner that works and cuts across party lines. So he has definitely very much intrigued me.
He intrigues me also. The administration started with his performance in the East Palestine, Illinois,
Yeah.
the train derailment. I thought he was a little slow on the uptake on that one. However, over the term, his performance really improved. He showed himself very competent at running one of the most complex agencies of government, an agency that I served in the second term of the George W. Bush administration, and that's the Environmental Protection Agency. So he was able to deal with the bureaucracy there, and at the same time tend to his duties as the Secretary of the Department of Transportation. So he showed what I would call some administrative agility, and plus, he is a very incisive policy person. So he will be considered very seriously for the nomination in 2028.
Uh, and we're going to get this very soon. I think he could be a wild card to enter the DNC race. I think he could take a page out of Howard Dean's playbook, and may be a very interesting candidate and someone who can market and sell the party forward.
Well, he was going to run for it last time there was a contested race. I forget already when that was. But actually, his campaign chair was New Jersey's Jennifer Holdsworth. She was chairing his effort to become the chair of the DNC. I would suspect that he does go to Jersey Voices and Jersey Concerned Citizens to shore up their support before he actually makes the run. But he very much could. I would not be surprised.
I think a lot of them are being respectful right now while they're still in the administration of not doing anything yet. They still have work to do over the next 3 weeks or so.
I concur, and I think that what they encounter in these next few weeks is going to be key to their decision. The next person I don't take that seriously as a presidential candidate, but I think he will be a powerful voice on behalf of real working class Democrats. He will represent rural Democratic America to a very large extent, and that's Senator John Fetterman of Pennsylvania. I know the town he's from, Braddock, PA, because I grew up in Western Pennsylvania. My father was a salesperson on the road in terms of men's apparel, and that was a working class town he dealt with. And that's actually a feather in the cap of Fetterman that he represented a town like that. But it sounds to me as if he's interested in running, but he hasn't decided yet.
Um, I think he represents a new Democratic Party. I was reading more about his thoughts on the various appointees, and I happen to think where he's coming from makes a lot of sense. Um, Saying that the president picked these people, definitely not his first, second choice, or third, but that's democracy. And to see the Democrats turn their backs collectively on the leader is dangerous. And I think he has um, been really smart about warning people you gotta chill out in terms of Trump derangement syndrome. Um, I think it's interesting that he's bringing a spirit of bipartisanship that no one ever saw coming. The progressives are ready to murder him. They feel like a tremendous letdown between his incredible support for Israel and his ability to realize the U.S. government is bigger than any single one person.
His support of Israel is very much steadfast, but I think that nobody trusts him. I don't think that's right. I think he is trustworthy, but he has, in terms of staking out an independent policy on various matters, he has managed to alienate a lot of people. So I'm not so convinced that he can be a credible candidate for the office of chair of the Democrat National
Or even
Committee.
for president, but I do think he's an important voice. And I think he
Yes,
represents a
he is.
maturation of what the Democratic Party needs to look like in terms of talking to middle America and especially your lower income and poverty, where somehow Donald Trump, being one of the richest men in the world with Elon Musk next to him, somehow manages to attract all these people who are struggling, yet they have nothing in common with either of these two men.
That is one of the great ironies of American politics today. It very much is an irony. And what develops of that, we're going to see. The difficulty Trump has, he's being upstaged by Elon Musk,
Oh yeah,
very much so, but he's reluctant to do anything about it for two reasons. Number one, Musk provides a lot of fundraising resources for the Republican Party. But number two, Trump is deathly afraid of alienating a major media concern whom he may be relying on. Trump does not have the support of the New York Times. The Washington Post is being a little bit gingerly on what they're going to do and how they're going to rule on things once Trump is in power. But nevertheless, he has a certain insecurity about states for certain blue states. So therefore, he does not want to alienate either a major media concern or a player such as the leadership of these various, like Jeff Bezos at the Washington Post and leaders of other media concerns.
100%. So going back to governors, we have one of mine and your favorite governors in Josh Shapiro. But I do think, unfortunately, with the ongoing crisis in the Middle East, there's always going to face some implicit bias that unfortunately has hammered the Jewish community since Joe Lieberman.
I agree with you 1000%. I think Josh Shapiro would make a great president. I supported him very strongly for the vice president for Kamala Harris this time. But the Democrat Party, and I don't say this disrespectfully, maybe the Democratic Party may be looking for somebody who is sort of white bread, so to speak. I don't mean racially white, but someone who doesn't offend anybody's taste. And Jews right now are very much on the firing line because of the continuing events in the Middle East. Jews may actually want to stay out of being on anyone's national ticket. So I'm not sure. I, I I do. Let me say this: I think Josh Shapiro wants to be president,
Yes,
but whether he will be willing to take the leap this time, I'm not sure.
agreed. I think also, sorry, lost my train of thought for a second. I think he represents the future in a way. I think being the governor of Pennsylvania is huge. He has a re-election in this time frame before 2028, and I think that will also be very telling. And I think he's going to have a chip on his shoulder. I think had he been on the ticket, I think it would have been a closer election. Um,
I think it would have been too, but I think that the Democrats may feel this isn't my feeling, but the Democrats may feel that Andy Bashir reflects middle America more and is less of a risk. I could be wrong on that, though. I'm not printing that engraved on Mount Sinai.
100. And I think the next person we and I both talked about, who is another person who could have been the vice presidential candidate, Governor Gretchen Whitmire, who is incredible in Michigan. She
She's very
had
well thought of.
very well thought of across both sides in Michigan, has done a wonderful job as governor. I think there was a lot of fear. I think there is still rampant sexism in our country, which is why I don't think the Harris campaign was willing to take the risk of having two female candidates for the first time, which is unfortunate.
Well, I think the Democrats are willing to definitely nominate a woman as vice president, but you're correct. I don't think they want two women on a national ticket. And I think that they want to be compatible. And I'm not saying this is a good thing. The Democrats are having an obsession now of being compatible with middle American values, even when those values may be at odds with the values of the Democratic Party. So for that reason, I don't see two women being on the ticket. I don't see Gretchen Whitmire being the national candidate for president, but she will have a say in the process.
100%. And then we've got some wild cards. Looking back at the DNC, because usually with the DNC, you get a couple stars. That's what brought Barack Obama to the stage, Cory Booker to the stage. when people use that as a jumping ground. And for one of those people, for me, was U.S. Representative Jasmine Crockett from Dallas, Texas. Her speech and she brought a vision and an energy, and coming from Dallas and Texas is huge. Um, there's a spirit there, and I think she'll be someone to watch.
I think Jasmine Crockett is terrific. There has been for many years a certain tension, less than before, between the African American and Jewish communities. It really began around more than 50 years ago, in the year 1968, with the Ocean Hill Brownsville teacher strike in New York City, where the African American population was really determined to have local control. And the largely Jewish American Federation of Teachers was fighting that because they thought it would cost them job security. It's often said in terms of Black Jewish relations in the major cities of this country that the problem is when you're an African American, you're confronting almost on a daily basis. You're confronting an Irish person and three Jewish people in positions of authority. The Irish person is the policeman on the beat, and
Yeah.
blacks have often been subject to police brutality. So that's a problem right there. In terms of other Jewish confrontations for a ghetto resident, you have the possibility in terms in terms of number one, the teacher, number two, the social worker, and number three, the landlord. This is what the African American resident of ghetto areas is confronting every day, and that led to tension for years. That spawned the rise of Jesse Jackson, who was willing to use outright anti-Semitism in his campaigns. However, that state of tension, that state of antagonism, I think, has largely faded. And I think the Jewish African American relations have been better than ever before. And I give a lot of that credit to number one, Hakeem Jeffries, as Speaker of the House of Representatives, who has taken an unequivocal pro Israel position. And number two is Jasmine Crockett of Texas, who has been a wonderful advocate for Israel and has worked very closely with Jewish national leadership, APAC national leadership. And number three, there are other representatives like Chantel Brown, I believe, of Ohio, who has
Yes.
been very, very pro-Israel. You do have some members of the African American community who've been really a negative for Israel, such as Representative Summer. I believe she represents the Squirrel Hill area of Pittsburgh and all places. But by and large, African American Jewish relations have improved significantly.
I think Minority Leader Jeffries represents, I mean, when he first came on, I will forever have his speech that he did using free verse poetry ingrained in my head. That really set the tone of what the new Democratic Party was going to look like in the House. He is incredible. I'm really excited to see what happens. I think he is calculating. I think he is going to see an avenue, and I could very much see the Democrats regaining control in 2026 because he's going to go out there and work his tail off to find candidates that can win and retake some of these seats that will then set up the Democrats for success in 2028.
I concur. In fact, I made a Freudian slip. I said Speaker Jeffries instead of Democrat Minority Leaders Jeffries, but I fully expect that he will be elected Speaker after the off-year election in the year 2026. But he is the most effective Democrat House leader I have seen in a long period of time, and he really showed a mastery over both issues and process over the past few
I
years.
also think we are going to be looking at several special elections. And special elections bring very interesting election results. But the number of people who Trump has picked from the House from quote unquote safe seats, there are no safe seats when there's a special election. Turnout is significantly low, and that's when surprises occur. And if things go wrong in Trump world, I think you're going to see a rise of angry voters looking for a stopgap. And these special elections are going to be a way to do that.
I think so. Right now, I believe there are 217 Republican members of the House of Representatives and 215 Democrats. Meaning, if you have one defection from the Republican Party and the Democrats all stick together, you have deadlock, and
Yep.
the Republicans cannot win any Trump majority on any issues as long as that is the case.
Yes. So I think I think Trump does not have the political foresight to think down the road about what could happen elsewhere. I think he thinks he is a God complex in many ways. And I think that will come back and bite him in the ass, to put it bluntly.
Well, no, I like that terminology, and I think it was actually elegantly stated by you.
So I think it'll be very interesting. So going back to the DNC for the Democrats for a little bit, who do we think is going to come into the DNC chair? We've already talked a little bit about possibly Secretary Buttigieg announcing after his term is up as Secretary of Transportation. Who else is on your list for that?
Martin O'Malley.
All right.
You know, he was the mayor. He was the mayor of Baltimore. Baltimore is a city that has been afflicted with a number of problems and economic problems, sociological problems. I saw him on television this morning. I was very impressed with his political instincts, the sense of keeping all the various ethnic and racial groups in the fold and giving everybody a chance to state their point of view. He's more or less like our website. We call our website Dynamic Political Centrism. The idea of this website is we search for solutions and we try to forge a consensus based on compromise, a consensus based on forging a consensus, and a consensus based on common ground. And it struck me that Martin O'Malley reflected those qualities.
So I've got one that really comes to mind to me. Is Ben Wickler from Wisconsin, who helped get flip that governorship. And I think yet another interesting Carson talking about flyover country in middle America, who would be an interesting voice. Um, and Wisconsin is not a left state, even though he is seen as a progressive in many regards. So you need to look at someone who has campaign strength, can build um, a system. I think one of the biggest failures of Barack Obama is his movement collapsed after his election. There was
Yes,
no successor.
I agree with you on Ben Wickler. I think that he is a very good prospect, but I'm not going to predict a winner except
Not at all. Too early.
of the chair, except that it will be a very hard fought contest.
Yes.
There's a lot at stake there, and the DNC chair also will have to be very adept at fundraising. I remember years ago when I first got involved in New Jersey, Camden County politics, the Republican Party, which was a dinosaur at that time, had as a leader a man who was later killed. And his famous quote was, "There ain't no romance without finance."
Yep.
And so the ability to finance campaigns all over the country will be a key quality that the members of the DNC will be looking for in electing any chair.
I also think the Democrats have to get off the high horse when it comes to super PACs. Unfortunately, the Republicans have masterminded the super PAC far more than the Democrats have. And I think that's going to be very important in the future. Unfortunately, thanks to Citizens United up in the Supreme Court, is unfortunately, yes, we want to have the moral high ground, but sometimes you got to play the money game.
The money game is the ball game anymore. That's the difficulty. So we're going to find that out within the first few weeks of the Trump 47 administration. I don't know if he's going to advocate for, on the Republican side for any candidate going forward. Right now, things are sort of status quo. On the Democrat side, I don't know who is the favorite at this point
There
for
isn't.
the DNC chair.
There is no clear leader of who leads the Democrats right now. It's very much like what happened when Mitch Romney lost. And ironically, Ryan's previous reports turned out to be completely false because then they elected Donald Trump and he won twice.
Right.
So I think it'll be interesting not to read too much into what they're saying because things are so moving very quickly and changing. And
Matters are in flux.
yeah.
No question about that.
So President Biden has about 3 weeks left in his presidency. Um, how do you think he did?
I give him a rating of B or B minus. I give him a rating overall on positive rating on foreign policy. I give him a positive rating on Israel. I think that the Jews who are very politically conservative on the right have been very unfair to him because he gave Israel all the weaponry they asked for. He never issued any sanctions against Israel when Israel seemed to go against the terms of limitation on these weapons. So he was definitely pro-Israel and followed the long-term tradition of the Democratic Party. On Ukraine, I don't fault him for getting involved. The problem is there a way out? And I've had this feeling that Ukraine is not a good long range prospect for democracy. And I think that Biden didn't have any choice, given the fact that we already had a certain involvement. I give him credit for the fact that he never sent troops into the Ukraine, that he
Yes.
limited the involvement to military aid. I have no problem in circumstances like Ukraine of the United States being the arsenal of democracy. I would have a serious problem if the United States either sent in troops into the Ukraine or pushed for Ukraine to be admitted to NATO membership. The United States is already very committed, and allowing Ukraine into NATO would result in an overcommitment. So
No.
I think the historical rating in that regard will be uncertain as to Ukraine, but he was very good in terms of the NATO alliance as a whole, very good in terms of other alliances we've had. He will be missed by leaders internationally. In terms of going forward on Biden on the economy, I think he did a good job. The problem with the economy was we were coming out of COVID. There was a lot of money in circulation that was just sitting there. And the moment the national lockdown ended, all that money went into circulation and it created a massive inflation. That was bound to happen given the nature of the national COVID shutdown. Now, I think that Biden basically guided the economy very gingerly, gradually. We've seen the rate of inflation go down. We've also seen the infrastructure being built, in the building of infrastructure, even though it resulted in deficit financing. When you're adding an asset, a capital asset onto your economy, that really takes away from the possible inflationary concept. But I do think that he will be rated very high because of the infrastructure package. And I do think the major problem the Biden administration has had is one of communication.
I
They
was
have
just
not
going to go
really
there.
communicated to the public. They should have right off the bat, after he was inaugurated in 2021, saying, I can see a day when everyone will be vaccinated. We've made great progress in terms of, I believe it was Operation Warp Speed, in terms of going as quickly as possible to have everybody vaccinated. However, once the lockdown ends, you will have an inflation that's inevitable, given the consequence. It was like you were putting your thumb in the bottle cap area, and the moment your thumb was lifted, you would have an explosion. He could have explained this to the public. Communication is not a Biden strong suit. And I think that affected basically the perception of the economy and the economy itself.
No, I agree. I also think going back to the communication challenge, it's been a Democratic problem for a long time. They don't know how to sell themselves. They don't know how to explain people and walk them through it. They seem distant. It goes back to one of your people, your heroes, former President George W. Bush. One of the things that made him so attractive is that you felt like you could sit down with him at a bar in your house and he could have a real conversation with you. The Democrats haven't had that since President Obama. I
I tend to concur with you. Although the candidate, the Democrat office holder who really did have that capacity was George W. Bush, but he didn't. He was not there, of course, during the COVID period, but it affected him later on in terms of foreign policy. In terms of communicating any rationale for our Iraq involvement, and also Bush never got the full credit for the International AIDS Initiative, PrEPFAR, which saved the lives of 30 million people. This was the greatest international activity and initiative in the history of the American presidency. He deserved tremendous credit for that, but he never really communicated what was going on. In terms of Biden, he is a guy you can have a beer with, but you're not sure as to what he's going to say once you get your beers together. And
Correct.
I think his communication problem will be viewed in retrospect as his major difficulty in terms of selling his agenda and establishing a good framework for democratic victory in 2024.
For me, I'm actually at a C. I felt like there was a lot of empty promises he made, especially to my generation. And he did not do a good job passing the torch to mobilize my generation, who was very mobilized in 2020, and it seems like stayed home a lot in this election. Even when we're facing the massive amount of debt that exceeds a lot, which increases buying power, will start impacting the housing market, the car market, and things like that. And it goes back to, I know obviously they had a lot of challenges with the court, but that goes back to the Democrats not running on the court. The Republicans were all over the court from former President George W. Bush. That the Republicans were running on the court for as long as I can remember, and I've been following politics. The Democrats ignored the court. And
But now the Democrats have to face the court. It is the elephant that has walked into the room.
yes, and it's disturbing. I think the Democrats were always playing short term. The Republicans deserve credit. They seem to have been playing a long term game and knowing where the power was going to rest.
No, there's no question about it. And then there's another economic issue that is emerging its ugly head, and that's the issue of tariffs.
Correct, and the
Tariffs are a
international side.
disaster. The Smoot-Hawley tariff of 1930 resulted in the Great Depression. Tariffs will be a tax. Tariffs will actually add to the inflationary impact on the average household. What we've had in America over the past few years, Biden did create the conditions for a healthy macroeconomic recovery. But in terms of micro, the economics of every household, that has been a difficulty because when a person, a head of household, hears that the rate of inflation is going down, he'll say yes, but the reduction in the rate of inflation has not caused a downturn in terms of household goods like groceries and other foodstuffs. And so, therefore, that message that the overall economy is being guided slowly towards full recovery, that never really hit home
And I
with Democrats, particularly among men.
I think also explaining how this process works. This part of the economy is trickle down in a way, is that it starts here in terms of the impact on the prices the businesses pay, but then that takes time, and unfortunately, profits matter. I am nervous for the low income person. If these tariffs go through, that kills your Walmart, that kills your Amazon, and it's sometimes these big business people are going to be going after Trump because it's a joke if you think China, Russia, Canada, or Mexico are going to pay the tariffs. That doesn't work that way. We all know it, apparently, except Trump.
Yes, it is. It is a tax we all pay. It is a tax that will make it difficult for foreign companies number one, foreign concerns to buy American goods, and it will create a burden on our domestic consumers in terms of buying necessary foreign products. I could see the tariffs, for example, resulting in an increase in America's leading product, and that leading product, I believe, is the iPhone. And if you are going to have tariffs that are going to affect the prices of the components going into the iPhone, many of which are made overseas, you're going to have a serious problem.
Or look at the car market where everything is shared based on who has the patents. It's going to drive up the cost of American-made manufacturing. And the irony is most of the foreign cars are made in the United States now. So how does that impact the tariff? If the company, where is it? Is it based on where things are being built, or is it based on where the company is headquartered?
That's correct. It's a very complex issue. We don't have the answers yet as to exactly what the Trump administration will do in this regard. He promised tariffs as a protective measure, as a retaliatory measure. Tariffs like that have always backfired. And I'm not sure he's going to follow through on it, Trump. You never know with him. He will do what is politically expedient for him, but we
Correct.
don't know what he's going to do here.
And then that brings us to the international. We've already talked a little bit about Ukraine, but the elephant in the room is Israel and the Israel-Palestinian conflict that May the hostages be returned is ridiculous that it's over almost 450 days at this point. And it seems people have forgotten the human cost of it. And this morning, a former hostage passed away because she wasn't able to recover and had lost her husband and son.
The tragedy continues. There are no simple answers to respond to international terrorism that has resulted in the calamities of hostages. And I'm not sure we're at the end of the day, the end of the era of hostage taking. So it's going to be very, very tough. I think where Trump may have hurt himself is he's overpromised. He gives the voters, a lot of his following, the impression that he can solve any problem, that he'll just shoot his way through all these terrorists. It's not so simple.
Oh, and then have to declare bankruptcy because that's what he does.
Yes.
To put a little light at the moment. But I do want to give credit to him. He is doing a good job in terms of playing bad cop and telling the Hamas to take the deal now before he comes in. Because it seems like he's going to unleash Netanyahu and take away all the guardrails that were set up by Biden in terms of controlling what Netanyahu could or couldn't do. Um, I think with Trump, you could see Netanyahu carpet bomb Gaza.
Well, I'm not sure, however, that Netanyahu necessarily wants to take advantage of that because public opinion in Israel is very divided. You know, certainly right of center voters predominate, but I'm not so sure that Israel is going to take advantage of opportunities that Trump gives them militarily because they may be afraid of alienating a lot of leftward countries they do business with, a lot of cutting edge new high tech industries. I'm not sure Israel will take advantage of this situation in that vein.
It'll be interesting to see because Netanyahu, Bibi, and Trump are very much aligned, whereas Bibi and Biden were not aligned in any sense of the imagination. There was a lot of negative history there.
I agree.
Um,
I agree.
so I think let's bring it home. You and I both live and die by New Jersey politics, to put it bluntly.
Well, the winner of the year is easy, and that was Andy Kim.
Oh, 100%. I don't think we're ever going to see a winner of his caliber for some time.
I agree. Number one was the fact that he took legal action against the line that exists in the various primary elections, where all the candidates who have the county endorsement are running on the same line, and they almost always all win. And he went to court, took action against it, and the line no longer exists. The question is, I was talking to Julie Sass Rubin of Rutgers on that, who has done some research on the impact of the line. The line basically could be worth as much as 70% of the vote in a primary. The question is, without the line, how much is organizational support worth? She has done some assessments in this regard, and she has found that the organizational impact can be high if the organization runs a good GOTV, a good get out the vote record and effort. But it varies from county to county. In terms of fundraising, that's also where the existence of the county line can make a difference. But I'm not so sure that that will be the difference in 2026. You have a lot of independent groups out there that can raise a lot of money. So I don't think any candidate worth his or her salt is going to rely on the county line to
Um,
raise them the money that they need.
I mean, I think it says a lot that after the everything was said and done for the race, that Kim refused the endorsement of the Camden County line. So I live in Camden County in Cherry Hill. It was very interesting. The signs from the Camden County Democratic Party did not list senator on it. It went Harris, Walls, and then Donald Norcross, which was a very interesting statement. And I think talks to the independence of Andy Kim. He is not beholden to anyone in the state. He is a true independent. He also he understands where he came from. One of my favorite tweets from him was the fact that anyone who's a political junkie knows that the Senate desks have history in them. Every Senate desk is signed by the previous senators who have used it, going back to the start of start of the Senate seat existing. And his desk has the signature of the amazing senator from Hawaii, late senator, who
Dan Inouye.
Dan anyway, who is awarded Democratic Medal, the Medal of Freedom, and the two only person to be awarded both medals on an international level. And the level of respect that Andy Kim paid to him is huge. People don't show that level of respect these days. You saw how much he respected the halls of the Congress when on his own he was cleaning up, and his suit now sits in the Smithsonian Museum. He understands the hallowedness of the chamber. He also is young. He's only a couple years older than I am. He has young kids like I do. He is incredibly relatable. He was very funny when he posted when he got to run the Senate. For those who don't know, the Senate president doesn't actually go to the Senate ever, so it rotates through each member of the majority party. So earlier this week, he had the privilege of running the Senate session, and he posted humorously that what did he learn out of it? He goes, "Be careful when you lean back in the chair," making it
Well,
relatable, but also honoring what it means to run it and what it means to be the first Asian American senator from New Jersey.
he is one of those rare cases of being a U.S. senator who I think will dominate the party and be the party leader, even in periods where Democrats control the state house, they control the governorship and control the legislature. He has that degree of popularity where Democratic Party officials at all levels, including rank and file groups, will defer to him. But now the issue is basically, and what he did to prevent Tammy Murphy from being nominated for the U.S. Senate was monumental. I
100%.
never expected that. I
No,
never expected that he would be able to stop her from getting the nomination.
and he lame duck Murphy. He quickly brought Murphy to the end of his term. When the governor can't get his wife a Senate seat, you're dead in the water.
I concur.
I think Murphy is facing a tremendous challenge with this budget, and a lot of this is caused by Kim. People are now looking past him. He is yesterday's news. And Andy Kim did a lot to do that and damage that brand.
He certainly did. And Andy Kim is going to be a huge factor in the Democrat gubernatorial primary in June. He
100%.
has announced he's going to make an endorsement. I think there are three possibilities. He's not going to endorse Josh Gottheimer. Gottheimer is too far to Kim's right.
Yes.
But he will either endorse Mikey Sherrill. If he endorses Mikey Sherrill, she becomes almost a prohibitive favorite to win the Democratic nomination for governor. He could also endorse Steve Fulop, who's running a campaign really outside the line, and he's trying to make an impact with that, and by getting slates of assembly candidates to run with him in the various counties, and that's a possibility definitely for him. But the third possibility for Andy Kim is the most fascinating, and that's the possibility of him endorsing Ras Baraka for governor. Baraka is going to do very well in Essex County in terms of Newark, in terms of African American areas, but an endorsement from Kim could result in him attracting a large white votership of progressives throughout the state. I think if Kim endorses Baraka, Baraka, excuse me, goes to the top tier of candidates. The other two top tier candidates being Mikey Sherrill and Josh Gottheimer. So this is going to be the months, I say that in plural, of Andy Kim. It's going to be a period of watchful waiting on the part of Democrats to see what he does in this gubernatorial race.
I agree. I think he's going to look at the mayors over the congressional leaders because Josh and Mikey are going to have a problem with such a narrow majority for the Republicans. They cannot afford to miss votes. They have a day job. It's always challenging to run for a new office when your office is currently based in DC and you have a duty to the voters and don't become an absentee person. And especially when there's deal making, that Josh is selling point is he's a deal maker. He has incredible ties across the aisle, but you can't make those deals if you're not there and you're not seen as being present, and that will hurt him in the long run.
I concur, and I think that it's been done before. Jim Florio ran in the Democratic primaries and as a congressman in 1981, And in 1989, he won the nomination and then he won the governorship. It's been done before, but nevertheless, as you've indicated, it's not easy.
He was running when
And
Democrats had a 30 to 100 seat majority. It was a totally different world.
that's true too. But nevertheless, he did have a job, a very prominent job, in terms of the Public Works Committee, in terms of the environmental subcommittee, and he had to basically balance. And since environment was his big selling point, he had to balance all these concerns. Jim Florio somehow managed to do that. But we'll see how
Uh,
Mikey Sherrill and Josh Gottheimer
I, I don't see them
comport
as
with that challenge.
they are
I'm
no
sorry.
Jim Florio.
Oh, neither one is a Jim Florio.
Um,
Jim Florio is once in a generation, once every two generations. He's somebody admired a great deal. Now, on this podcast, we are covering very closely all events Jersey. And the podcast nowadays, the various podcasts are having an impact on public opinion that was never foreseen. What you're seeing now, which I think is a bad tendency in New Jersey, is a reduction in press coverage.
Vote press.
Unfortunately, this year was a sad year for me personally with the passing of Michael Aaron. I was personally close to Michael. Michael was the dean of the State House Press Corps. I don't think he was too happy with the termination of NJN and their substitution by NJ Spotlight News. NJN had a real cachet to it and was very effective in terms of informing the Jersey public at large. Michael was the ultimate superb host of the various talk shows, in particular when you had a national race and you had the various national campaigns coming into New Jersey. His interview of Bill Clinton was a classic, but
Yes,
he also was very adept at covering the candidates running for local offices. He really understood New Jersey. He was unfailingly polite. He had an instinct for whatever issue would be prioritized by each of the parties. We're going to miss him. We miss him already.
100%. Um,
And the other factor is news coverage has really been reduced in the Garden State. I used to walk up to press row at the State House. I would go around and, to use an inelegant word, I used to schmooze, as they say, with the various members of the State House Press Corps. Have very good conversations with them. We would exchange information. It was a very good process also for making government work. But there really is no real press row anymore, unfortunately. So many newspapers have either had reductions in force or actually lost the capacity to cover issues and are no longer present in the State House. The New York Times, for example, was the coin of the realm in State House reporting for years. There no longer is a New York Times presence at the State House. So all these things are very bad tendencies. And I think that it's going to, number one, it's going to hurt citizenship in the Garden State because nothing ensured accountability like the State House Press Corps, their investigative reporting, when they focused on issues, they really were an absolute vital resource for the voters of the state. But there are not that many of them anymore, and newspapers are cutting down their hires. And the great stars that you see on TV from the press corps, they're being a little bit more gingerly because they know that if there's pressure put on members or editors in the State House Press Corps, ultimately the burden of that is going to fall on these various newspapers and the members of the press corps themselves. The virtual demise of the press corps, I think, has been a big negative for New Jersey government and politics.
100%. I think what will be interesting to see is you've got a lot of independent have come up. We've got down in South Jersey, we've got 70 and 73. We also have Spotlight News that's doing some things, New Jersey Penn. So a lot of these independent places are trying to fill the gap, but I don't think they've got the strength that to do it. And I think it goes back to Twitter/X that represents where most people go and find their news. It's self-generating. You're looking to go for the viral moment.
Unfortunately, it's an easy way out. And the great in-depth press investigations we used to have, Investigative reporting seems to be a thing of the past. And opinion journalism seems to be hindered by two things. Number one, a lack of money to hire really good opinion journalists. And number two, the newspapers, even on a local level, are afraid of Donald Trump. They're afraid of or somehow generating his ire. And I think that's a problem. We will not have good accountability in this state unless we have thorough opinion journalism and thorough investigative reporting.
100%. I just don't know where it comes from. I am in my day job the advisor for the student newspaper, and something I'm pushing for my students are going to be producing podcasts and trying to create that for them. And Cherry Hill to push that, they have a world-class paper at Cherry Hill High School East that is generating news that's gotten picked up. Their scoop and research into the uh, cryptocurrency got picked up nationally because they did a better job investigating it than the official newspapers, quote unquote. So
Well, that is a that is a key point that you're making. That is basically a matter of that local news anymore in New Jersey, more than the various news chains are carrying the water. That really applies to the forthcoming gubernatorial race. You have, as I mentioned before, you have the top tier candidates who are Mikey Sherrill, excuse me, and Josh Gottheimer. They will be joined by a third candidate if Andy Kim endorses somebody else. I think that they will have to use their money to get a message out, but not only using the money, they're going to rely very heavily on local news, both local network affiliated news and also local independent news. So the burden is in large part going to shift to local news outlets in New Jersey. I think that'll be a phenomenon of this campaign.
100%. So I think move on to a more happier and joyful topic. You and I are both sports addicts. And 2024 was an excellent year in sports across a variety of different areas. Um,
It was fun. I'll tell you what played a role for me. It was the year that I fell in love with baseball again because I would get so upset with the developments, the vitriol in the campaign, the threat to democracy posed by Donald Trump. I started going to a lot of baseball games because baseball is a rather inexpensive form of entertainment. And the park that the New York Mets play in now, which is Citi Field, is a replica of old Ebbets Field. And it was a thrill for me as someone who grew up as a fan of the Brooklyn Dodgers. It was a thrill for me to go to Met games, inexpensive. I found that my two major forms of entertainment in New Jersey and the New York metropolitan area, the two major forms of entertainment both centered on the word Met, the Metropolitan Opera and the New York Mets. And by the way, opera is far less expensive than other forms of comparable entertainment. I know I've taken my granddaughter to various Broadway shows. It's expensive. When I was a kid and I'd come to New York with my dad, Broadway shows were really inexpensive, really affordable. That's no longer the case. So I basically, at this point in my life, find myself more and more married, so to speak, to baseball and to the opera. Baseball, you can tell by the size of the contracts these guys are getting that it's a sport that is a flush and cast. And I think that the fans have come back. Attendance is terrific. I think that you now have marketable stars like Shohei Ohtani. I think that the resurrection of baseball has been a great thing. Also, there seems to be a decline in terms of the NBA because their ticket prices are off the chart. I'm a fan of the Brooklyn Nets, but I find myself just going to games with lesser opponents because the cost of tickets, even for the Nets in Brooklyn, is very expensive, almost prohibitive. So
100%.
we'll have to see what goes
100%.
eventually.
I do want to give credit to the NBA. Their most recent contract with the players and putting in the minimum game played in order to get awards was huge, and uh the punishment for when you were benching stars for national games, load management. I think they did a nice job handling that. But I think the NBA's existence is on TV, similar to the NFL, which has also gotten very expensive to go in person. But both those make great TV watching, and you can see with
Well,
the
the
most
NFL
recent.
is the ultimate TV game. I'll tell you what amazes me about the NFL. I grew up in Pittsburgh, and for years, up until I went away to college, the Steelers were a failing franchise. Nowadays, I hear all this talk about Steeler Nation, and I get a kick out of it because I remember when I got made fun of for going to Steeler games. They had a failing team every year. Then in 1970, Dan Rooney took over from his father, Art Rooney, the management, day-to-day general management of the team. And that was a big moment. Art Rooney did great things. Art Rooney was a super person. He did great things for the National Football League, but he was not good at running a franchise. Once Dan Rooney took over, the Steelers started to explode. They had phenomenal drafts. When Art Rooney was in charge, they had the worst drafts in the world, but the team started to improve. Television was a major factor in the Steeler resurgence. It was the major factor in the resurgence of the National Football League. I shouldn't even say resurgence, I should say the surging of the National Football League, which really began its meteoric rise in the era of the Green Bay Packers and the emergence of Vince Lombardi as the person I think was the greatest coach of any sport of all time. But Pete Rozelle was a genius, and he saw the future that the NFL would do as well as as its telecast. You've had this year the various streaming services are starting to cover NFL games like Prime Video. Netflix is covering some games, so this is all good. NBA television ratings seem to be on the verge of going downward. The NBA is not having a great attendance year. I think at this point, baseball has actually moved ahead of the NBA.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. I haven't looked at the numbers, last night, but I do want to shift over to one of the greatest stories of 2024, which is the rise of women's sports. Uh, what
I
we
agree.
what we've seen with the WNBA, with Asia Wilson, Caitlin Clark,
And the New York Liberty.
yeah, New York
New York
Liberty.
Liberty tickets are more expensive in many cases than even those of the Brooklyn Nets, and just as expensive as the New York Knicks.
Yeah, and I think we're seeing the leadership on pay equity as well, and with women's soccer. It's just been very exciting to see it being there and getting the right staging and now being equal to, in some cases, a better product than some of the men's sports to go to. The expansion coming up for the WNBA is going to be huge. The fighting over getting teams into your cities is great. And coming up, we've got the World Cup coming in 2026. It's just a really exciting time to be a sports fan in this area. Uh,
I attended a number of World Cup games when it was in New Jersey in the year 1994, and those tickets were not prohibitive, but they will be for this coming World Cup. But it will put the Meadowlands front and center in front of the nation again.
that's not called the Meadowlands.
Well, what are they going to just
Well,
call
the
it, New
Meadowlands
York?
have been called, but MetLife cannot be referred to as MetLife Stadium during it because there are strict rules for soccer.
Oh, you mean in terms of using the name of the stadium?
Correct. They cannot use names of people who don't sponsor soccer.
I understand that, but they can still use the term Meadowlands.
Sorry, the Meadowlands will exist, but MetLife Stadium will be New Jersey Stadium.
Well, that's okay with me. I it has bothered me the corporate sponsorship of stadium names. City Field for the Mets works because most people don't even think of Citibank as being the sponsor. They think of the city,
Yeah,
being it's a city ballpark. But I'm worried about the time if the time ever comes when the Yankees try to get more money and sell the naming rights to Yankee Stadium, which is an iconic name. I don't someday want to hear something like Prudential Yankee Stadium. That would
yeah,
offend me.
100%.
Not because of Prudential, but because of the name of. I use that as an
Right.
example of the name of a private business concern, which all of a sudden becomes the name of the stadium. That would offend me.
I think the other good news that came out this year is the professionalization of NCAA, with name and likeness has really gone over well. The recent court ruling also for junior college athletes is huge, that they maintain 4 years of eligibility now.
I have
So
loved these NCAA football playoffs,
yes,
even more than I used to really enjoy the NCAA basketball playoffs. These games are great. I think it was a genius that they had the early rounds in the top seed in the home stadium of
yes.
the top seed. I think that was a brilliant move. I think also it was a lot of football viewers were concerned that the playoffs would eclipse the bowl games, but that hasn't happened because various rounds of the tournament are being held in lieu of the bowl games. For example, Oregon is going to be playing Ohio State in a Rose Bowl, which is officially a quarterfinal game. That game may set record television ratings. So far from hindering the Rose Bowl, the fact that it is also an NCAA college football playoff game is a big asset to it.
No, it's exciting. I'm very excited to see where the NCAA is going with this. I think it'd be great news for the players. It's just really exciting.
It's going to be great. Now, both in terms of our research, both Yoni and I are avid readers, mostly in the area of history, political science, and I have a reading list every year. I just want to pay tribute to two people for my reading list of 2024. The two best academics in terms of political science and history right now in America, in my view. Number one, they're both from Yale. Number one is Tim Snyder, who wrote the books Bloodlands and about the Holocaust and the conditions that resulted in a lack of government that could have intervened on behalf of Holocaust victims. Tim Snyder is a superb author. I just got a book of his for my reading list in the year 2025. It's a book called On Freedom. He's written books before on tyranny. A book of his I read this year that explained the origins of the various nations of Eastern Europe was just phenomenal. So he is a top flight preference of mine. The other is Jason Stanley, who has written books on propaganda and also on what is fascism and how do fascist regimes take over. He has written. I finished my reading list early, and I decided to start with my next year list. So I am reading the book called "Erasing History," and this is a must-read for anybody concerned about the preservation of our democracy. The book explains how, whenever history is rewritten to make it sound as if there is only one ethnic group that is worthy of societal governance and that all the other ethnic groups constitute outsiders. Whenever education starts to reflect xenophobia, that's when democracy is in trouble. So I'm reading Stanley's book right now, Erasing History. To give you an idea of the other books on my reading list for the year, after that, I am going to be reading books by a person who is regarded as the other great expert on fascism. Jason Stanley is basically number one. But number two is a person who's been involved in studying this area for generations, Robert Paxton. He wrote a book about the emergence of the Vichy regime, which followed a fascist agenda in France during the Second World War. And it's very worth reading. And he also wrote a book on an overall history of fascism itself, which is near the top of my forthcoming reading list. I also am reading a book by a namesake of mine, Jonathan Steinberg, who unfortunately passed away, and it's entitled Bismarck. It's all about Otto von Bismarck and his notions of realpolitik. Bismarck was a fascinating leader in Germany. He was not an anti Semite. He was a person who sometimes would resort to dog whistles that may have had some anti-Semitism, but he would have thought that Adolf Hitler was a lunatic and was to be despised. So not that Bismarck was a virtuous man, but he was a very smart practitioner of realpolitik. He's someone that Henry Kissinger admired tremendously. I also will be reading the book by David Greenberg on John Lewis, who was a hero to the whole generation of my son for what he did for civil rights, emerging as the national civil rights leader in the era when, unfortunately, Martin Luther King was Jr. was assassinated and lost to this country, and he was a person of true greatness. I'm also reading the book G-Men about Herbert Hoover, about J. Edgar Hoover. Big difference from Herbert Hoover. J.
Yes.
Edgar Hoover. J. Edgar Hoover, on the one hand, he could be given credit for two things. Number one, he really professionalized the FBI, and number two is that he refused to do any president's bidding if a president wanted to do retribution against his or her political enemies. But on the other hand, J. Edgar Hoover was a hypocrite. He was engaged in all this anti-homosexual activity while he himself had a homosexual relationship with Clyde Tolson. And he himself also was a racist. And that was a stain on those years on the FBI. He wiretapped Martin Luther King's Jr.'s phone, did a number of bad things, but it makes for fascinating historical reading. So those books will be on my list as well. And I'm also reading a book by General Andy Basovich, who has emerged as an authority on realpolitik, military and foreign policy. And it's a book that basically advocates that we have to stop being obsessed with America as experiencing an American century, and that degree of leeway where America can play that role in the world is past, and we have to adjust ourselves.
Excellent. So on mine, I've got interesting because of my scope of interest. I'm also very passionate about the arts, so that takes in some of my reading from this year. I'm gonna start with an interesting one. AJ Jacobs is a partial humor writer. One of my favorite books in the past was Living the Year Biblically. This year, he put out a book called The Year Living Constitutionally, where he attempts to follow the Constitution by the letter of the Constitution. As a historical person, it's a fascinating read. I really recommend it. I also picked up The Miracle on the Hudson, which is the narrative memoir by the captain of the flight, which was incredibly powerful.
I have to tell you, if I can just interrupt something about that flight. That flight took place on one of my last days at EPA, and I was looking out my window. They had my closing ceremonies that day. I was looking out my window and I saw that plane floating on the Hudson River, and I was in communication with Washington as to what measures that our agency should take. So you've sold me on that book. I've got to read it.
Really fascinating. Just a great guy who's done a lot as well in terms of plane safety and things like that.
Sully?
Yeah. And stayed prevalent. Another one I just read this year, People Love Dead Jews, by Dara Horn. Highly recommended. There's an excellent way of how advocacy tends to happen around dead Jews, not living Jews.
That's a
Uh,
sad commentary on our
yeah,
society.
so it's a really good read. I've actually quoted from it when I've testified before the state legislator, in terms of a bill I was advocating for its passage. Another one I am going to read, which is probably the most controversial book you'll ever hear mentioned. The book title is The N-Word by Randall Kennedy. It just came out with a new introduction this year based on the history of things that have gone on the last couple of years. And it is a fascinating read. I am a teacher at a school where it is predominantly Black slash African American, where my students use the N-word like it is nothing. And that we had conversations with them about trying to reclaim it. And me coming as being a white male has led to very interesting conversations. And this book just does an incredible job tracing that history. I highly recommend it. The new introduction is very powerful. It is worth your time. And then finally, I'm a musical lover. I finally had a chance to watch Come From Away on Apple TV. I'm grateful that they filmed it. There is a book that goes over the entire script and how they came across with doing the story. So Come From Away is the story of 9/11 and the plane that landed in Gander, Newfoundland. And it is awesome. And there's a very powerful, they keep a Jewish story going in it. They talk about how this rabbi was very pushy and advocated for his story to be included. And I thought that was really fascinating. And they do a really good job covering it. So I highly recommend that. I highly recommend watching that. It's a very powerful story of one of the darkest days in history and the story of people coming together. And at a time like we have right now, it's good to know. It's also very realistic. They asked the question there, why aren't they going to Toronto? Why aren't they going? And they're like, because no one's going to care if anything happens in Gander. And it's just a really real life check of what took place for something where I was only in eighth grade when it occurred.
Well, you have a diverse and compelling reading list, for which I must commend you, Dr. Yares. In the year to come, we're going to be focusing on certain areas, the continuance of the dangers of racism and xenophobia as personified by Trump, the threat that poses to democracy, the attempt by fascists, basically, in this country to gain control of education, just as what happened in Italy under Mussolini and what happened in Germany under Hitler, the continued growth of sports in the American and a place in the American pantheon. But we will be making a deep dive into the 2026 gubernatorial race. I cannot make a prediction.
Nope.
I'm not even going to try, but it is going to be a very competitive race. And you're, if any of you out there want to make a prediction of certainty, be my guest because I'm not going to do that.
No, I think I'm very excited for our conversation into race and xenophobia. Our viewers might not know this. My research for my dissertation was centered on diversity, equity, inclusion, and CRT and systems thinking. So it's an area I am very passionate about, especially now as an educator. The 2025, well, I love being in New Jersey. It's always an election year. And
That's true.
Virginia and New Jersey play a very important role with their gubernatorial election being the focus upon for 2025. It'll be very fascinating to see what happens, and also seeing what happens with the assembly, which is entirely up this year.
It also will be interesting to see how successful Steve Fulop is in running outside slates in the various assembly races.
100%. I think it's just going to be a very fun year in New Jersey. I'm against anybody who wants us to get rid of our off-year elections. I'm like, no, New Jersey needs to stay special.
I agree.
I think there's certain we don't need to come like every other state. It's already bad enough that we're flyover for the races for elections. At least give us our off year so people pay attention to us.
Well, I agree with you. And I think that we are going to see something more definitive in terms of the impact of local county organizations, the absence of the county line. All this is going to be great fodder for researchers, both at the Bloustein School and at the Eagleton Institute of Politics. Yoni, we've had a great year and we've had great listeners. I look forward to the expansion of our viewership. And I thank you for your excellent technological work in terms of the video production. In terms of, we've expanded now onto YouTube as well as Spotify. And you are the heart and soul of the operation of this. And I look forward also to having you as a participant in shows when we talk about education issues.
I'm excited. It's been a very fun project. When we started this a year ago, we didn't know where this was going to take us, and it's been a fascinating endeavor. I think podcasting is one of the main futures. I hopefully that we can fill the gap for people and get people to use us to find a source of knowledge and occasionally interesting opinions or opinions they just want to very virtually disagree with, which is fine with me. It's even more fun that way.
I like when you and I disagree because I think we add information to the debate, and we always disagree without being disagreeable. And the other thing, I have to give a note of thanks to Scott Polochik, who is the son of the woman in my life, Garnet Adams. Scott designed the emblem for this site, and he utilized the colors black and gold, which are the colors of the sports teams of Pittsburgh, where I grew up, the Pirates, the Steelers, and the Penguins. And when Scott gets this site, I hope he listens to the end. I want to thank Scott. He's given us one of the best emblems out there for a site. It appears on all our Substack
Yes,
articles as well.
100%. So I think it'll be really fun. I'll turn it back to you for wrapping this up for our final show. I've got to say, tune in January. It's going to be very exciting.
I'm looking forward to January. I'm looking forward to Yoni and I being the dynamic duo once again. That's it for this show. And May the Almighty bless you and your families for a great holiday season and for a great year in 2026. That's it for tonight's episode of the Voice of Dynamic Political Centrism. And we look forward to all the unanswered questions we will be dealing with in 2026. Thank you very much and have a good evening.
We can't wait for you to join us for our newest content coming in January 2025. Please subscribe on YouTube and Spotify, and as always, check out our newest content on Substack.